What's up, everybody? Welcome to episode 19 of The PlayStation Effect. I'm your host, Marco. Joining me is my good friend and co-host, Pablo, and each week we explore the past, present, and future of PlayStation. And in this episode, we got to do it. We got to react to Sony's very controversial decision to discontinue physical discs on PlayStation in 2028. Plus, we'll also discuss Asha Sharma's XBOX reset, the layoffs, the studio spinoffs, and the strategic shifts that are shaping Xbox going forward. So get settled, get situated, subscribe if you enjoy the show, and let's get started with what is easily, Pablo, the single biggest story we've seen from PlayStation in quite some time, if ever, which is, of course, the fact that Sony is killing physical discs, man. Hot damn, bro. Last week, they dropped the bombshell. They announced they're going to discontinue physical disc production for all new PlayStation games starting in January 2028, and instead physical games will only contain digital activation codes instead of discs, much like what we're seeing Rockstar Games doing with GTA 6. And to make matters worse, Sony dropped this bomb on the same day that they announced the closures of the PS3 and PS Vita's digital storefronts, which, of course, gave gamers instant proof of just how fragile digital ownership can truly be. Now, since this announcement, Pablo, PlayStation, of course, has faced a tremendous amount of backlash that's been so unprecedented that they have gone on a complete social media blackout ever since, with many speculating that they would probably wait until this week and use Xbox as a meat shield of sorts once the news of the layoffs and studio divestments made headlines on that side of things. But the community has not relented one bit, man. And that's what brings us to our conversation here. Now, look, the lazy thing to do is to say this was inevitable and just kind of move on. It is true, but to some extent, it doesn't account for the valid concerns that fans have been raising about things like price monopolies, digital ownership, game preservation, the used game market, game sharing. So that's why we are going to take a more nuanced approach to look at this situation from every angle to assess the impact this will have, not only on us as consumers, but honestly, on the gaming industry as a whole. So I want to start with you, man. I want to kind of get your immediate reaction when you heard about this. What was your first thoughts when you found out that Sony is ending physical discs in 2028?
I was honestly shocked because while I always thought that the future was digital, I always thought it was going to be a lot like movies, where it might not be where you get your games at in terms of a store or a physical disc, but you always have the ability and the option to go and buy that thing. But the fact that they went cold turkey, it really just didn't make a lot of sense to me as to why they needed to do this and do it now. You know, obviously the talk is that the future of their consoles will not have any sort of disk drive, but man, 2 years, 3 years out, maybe 4 years out from the next console, announcing this now, just seems like you said, you seeing Xbox as a meat shield. It's like, why not we just announce this right now? But definitely shocked, and I just didn't expect them to ever really just completely shut down the production of discs. So yeah, that's where I'm at with it. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, I was also thinking about the timing as well, just trying to, assess what that could be about. But also, I just felt tremendously sad for the people who really do lean on physical discs as their way of experiencing video games. A lot of people talk big about how, well, have you seen the percentages? 90% of people play games digitally or whatever the percentage is. But that still leaves 14 to 18 million people very, very negatively affected by this. And when you think about that number, that doesn't sound so small at all. Those people got punched in the mouth by this news. And whether or not we are digital-centric consumers or physical consumers, the reality of the situation is that there should never be a loss of options on how you experience video games, from the way you play them to the way you purchase them. And to know that there is a timer now ticking down for those particular gamers who like to build that collection, who like to have their own physical copies, and that they have to make some very big decisions about where they game going forward if this is so important to them that they might walk away from PlayStation. That's a really lousy position to see people in.
Yeah.
So it's easy to say, well, I'm not affected by it because I don't buy games physically, but it's good to know it's an option. And as we'll talk about shortly, it keeps PlayStation honest when it comes to pricing and whatnot. So it's very spooky, man.
I don't think there's any argument to be made for this being a good thing. Even though I haven't bought a game physically in years, that doesn't mean that the loss of having the ability to buy a game is a good thing. I mean, I shared with you, and I've seen it online as well now. If you wanted to buy God of War Ragnarok right now, digital is $60. But if you go to either GameStop or even Walmart, it's on sale right now. The physical copy is currently on sale for like $39.99. Now, I will say the one thing that they've said is that older games before 2028, that the companies go out there and ask for a disc print and they would give that to them. But that's cool for the preservation of games that come out before 2028. But what's going to happen after that, Yeah,
and that kind of leads us right into, conversations around price monopolies, and that for me is a big sticking point. And that is the ultimate counterpoint to the people who say this doesn't affect me because, look, they get to decide how much things cost. They get to decide everything about discounts going forward, and they get to make it as expensive as they want to be. And that is a very scary precedent to set going forward because, to your earlier point about how cheap these physical copies can be sometimes, that is not the case on the PlayStation Store whatsoever. And now, with this being the only avenue to play PlayStation games or find PlayStation games, there's no telling what they're going to price these video games at going forward, especially now that Grand Theft Auto 6 is kind of raising the bar when it comes to launch prices. And I don't think that Sony necessarily has the wherewithal to understand that GTA can get away with that, but not you. I just think it's very dangerous to assume that this is not going to trickle down and affect everybody in some form or fashion or another, and that this just isn't another form of control to put the squeeze on gamers for daring to like PlayStation enough to want to buy games on the platform.
Yeah, so the truth is that as of late, PlayStation has been coated in greed, right? Everything PlayStation has done is been to maximize their profits, from raising game service prices to console prices. And the way that they've kind of announced this, trying to kind of deceptively hide behind the potential news of the future when it comes to Xbox, now you're asking me to trust that you're going to do right by us, that you're not going to monopolize the market, that you're not going to suddenly start pricing games at $80 and there's nothing that we can do about it. It's shut up and you'll love it. And unfortunately, because PlayStation is one of the market leaders and a tastemaker, this is going to be par for the course. People are just going to buy these games begrudgingly, yeah, maybe, but it is what it is at this point. At least that's how they see it. And that's just not good for consumers, period.
Yeah, because, I would even say that I don't think they're trying to hope that they get your trust. I think they're daring us to leave. Yeah. They're saying, hey, all those games you already have, you've been playing on PlayStation for however many years it's been. You really going to leave now because we're going digital when you're already buying games digital? They're trying to kind of rock the baby to sleep and say, you're already doing this anyway. This isn't going to even affect you. Yeah. But realistically, they're not doing this for charity. They're not doing this because it makes life easier for anybody. They're doing it because it improves their bottom line. And to that point, it's not like they're going to charge us $10 less because it's the digital version instead of the physical version, because the amount of cost it takes to print and ship and all these different things, they're not doing any of that. So this is certainly about squeezing us, and that level of just obviousness and transparency is just really scuzzy to me. And you can love PlayStation, but man, they make it hard sometimes to love them when things like this happen.
For people who have been following PlayStation for a long time, they always tend to sort of be a little arrogant in the way that they approach certain things. And that type of arrogance sometimes rub people the wrong way, but most times it really made people really proud to be PlayStation fans or, back PlayStation, because PlayStation's the shit. The whole Xbox digital sharing and how Andrew House and Yoshida went up there and was like, this is how you share games on Xbox, and just kind of handed the game over. That sort of attitude has always been performative, but now not only are they arrogant, but they're like, you're going to like it, you love us, fuck you, give me your money type of attitude, which now has crossed that path to like, I think there's going to be a lot of people who are going to have to think really hard and think twice before they even buy a console. And PlayStation is making it almost nearly impossible for them to even afford it at this point. But all this stuff is stacking. So I don't know, man. I hope that people kind of respond to this in a way where PlayStation is able to kind of check themselves and be able to be back on the side of consumers. They're never going to 100% do what's right by consumers, but at the very least, man, do something about what's going on right now within their power, and they're deciding not to,
Yeah, and I think part of it is also the way this was delivered in terms of how it was presented to us. There was no FAQs. There was no explanation of how this was going to work in terms of, will there be any sort of program like what Xbox is reportedly working on where they can help you transition your retail copy to a digital copy? That doesn't seem to be a thing. There were no real answers given about just what this means going forward in terms of backwards compatibility. So when the PS6 comes out, what do you do with your PS5 discs? Do you actually get a chance to run it on PS6 with like another external disk drive? Or do they pull a Don Matrick and say, we have a console for you? It's the PS5 you already have, right? So these types of questions that they just kind of left open-ended and vague, I think is a big part of the problem, because it let people connect their own dots and jump to the worst case scenario, which I think is a reality, which is that they don't really have a plan for you at all about this. This is just about subtracting something and ripping the Band-Aid off, like what they're doing now by closing down the PS3 and PS Vita's digital storefronts. There's no backup plan for that. It's just dead. And that's that kind of finality with no real, that's dead, but here's what can happen after for you to make life easier. Without that kind of thing, this is very, very messy and sloppily delivered to us. And it creates a lot of doubt in people, especially those who really value ownership of their games. Yeah. And to that point, Pablo, as they're shifting towards this digital ownership, I'm using air quotes here because it's more of like a license more than ownership. Can consumers truly trust digital ownership right now?
No, absolutely not. Something we haven't mentioned is that there's a Sony-based movie service out in the UK that just got shut
Studio
down.
Canal.
Yeah, 551 movies completely off. And if you own the quote-unquote thought you own the movie, no, you don't. You don't own that movie. Has been taken away from your library. So there's no way I can trust them to not muddy the waters, since they've already muddied the damn waters. It's just one of these things where there is not really a moment where Sony's going to sit there and be like, how can we take their games away, right? However, if you're going to make Sony pick between paying large amounts of money to renew some licenses to keep the game active versus what's right by the consumer, they're going to pick the option where they save money regardless of what happens to the consumer's copy of the digital game or whatever it is. So that's the issue here. We're not sitting here and saying that this evil corporation is like, now what can we do next to take the games out of the library? No, but it's simple. If you're going to give them a choice between what's right for the consumer versus what's right for the Sony pockets, they're going to pick the Sony pockets 10 times out of 10 times. That's just the way it is. And that's the real issue here.
Yeah, man, you're cooking on that one. And I agree. We already see games disappear sometimes from storefronts because of things like music license expiring, or publishers just can't be bothered to renew certain agreements. So imagining that happening more commonly when there's no physical copy to fall back on whatsoever is a really scary thought. But another thing that I think makes this very, very interesting is that Sony does not have the infrastructure for digital ownership from a security standpoint. There are stories popping up all the time of people having their accounts hijacked, of people having their accounts closed for no particular reason. I remember a couple years ago, if I'm not mistaken, you had problems accessing your PlayStation account at one point.
I did, yeah.
There's all kinds of weird things that happen to people's accounts all the time, and it's one of the least trusted from that particular standpoint, to the point where a lot of people don't put their credit card information online and they'll just use PayPal. So that's
what I did. I have Apple Pay on my thing, where I have to scan the thing on the QR code on the thing to pay through my Apple Pay, because I don't have my cards on there at all. Because that happened to me where one day I go to sign into my account and I don't have an account. Then I looked through my emails and said, well, something happened to your account, and I had to go through this recovery thing, and then I had to change my name. I changed the name, and then I got access to the account, but I was like, you know what? I'm taking all my credit card information out of there. I'm putting the Apple Pay thing on there, and that's where I'm at right there. Luckily, I didn't lose anything, but it's something that I had to go through where I have thousands of dollars worth of games, and it's not even my primary library of games, but I still have $1,000 worth of games on there that I could have lost based on, I don't know why. I didn't do anything, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's happening to high-profile people, too, like Colin Moriarty from Sacred Symbols, who's also a PlayStation podcaster. He recently went through this and had his account hijacked, and the only way that he was able to get it back is by pulling strings and connecting with people that he knew on the inside at Sony who can help him get his accounts back. So it's literally one of those cases where unless you know somebody that knows somebody, you might be screwed if the wrong thing happens and someone tries to access your account. And that's terrifying for the reasons that you said about spending thousands upon thousands of dollars building up a library that you can no longer access because fuck you, whatever. Our customer care agents don't know what they're doing anyway, so they're just going to give you the runaround and you're screwed. Start a new account.
Did you see the whole if you're inactive for 3 years, they delete your account thing?
Yeah.
And people are like, well, other people do that too. I looked at the FAQ for Xbox, and Xbox does it too in 24 months. If that account has no purchases on it. Now, if you purchase something on that account, it's yours in perpetuity, regardless of how long or you're absent from it. So, and I don't think that's Sony being like, let's just delete their account. Like you said, it's an infrastructure thing. They don't have the ability to keep all those accounts kept away somewhere without some kind of incentive in terms of, oh, these are actual users that can make us money in some way or the other. So that's another avenue of what the fuckness. Yeah,
digital ownership can't really work if A, you're licensing things out and it's not really ownership, and you just don't know how to protect your consumer.
Right.
That's
the big one.
That just makes it impossible. So that's why I'm like, how are you going to be ready by 2028 when you don't have things in place now to get ready for this? So that kind of ladders back up to what you said about like why now, why the timing of this announcement. It's like, you don't seem ready for this. But another aspect of this that I think has come up that I see both sides of in terms of arguments is the used game market, right? On the consumer side, there's no question that used games are a major money saver, especially at a time where everything's getting more expensive by the day, right? You can trade in a few games, you can rack up some credit, you can come home with something new and have a great time. And that type of flexibility and autonomy, Pablo, is what helps a lot of gamers stay afloat in this very turbulent time in gaming. So losing that makes harder decisions have to happen at point of sale, knowing that once you buy this game digitally, you're stuck with it. There's no trade-ins, there's no returns because the return policy sucks. So you're stuck with whatever you choose to go with here. So in terms of if this move does truly kill the used game market, do you agree that the impact of consumers is, in so many words, that bad?
I do, because, and I'm going to go off on a little bit of a tangent here. I think this impacts a very specific kind of customer. Last year, Circana released a poll, and they showed that 10% of gamers buy on average one game a month, where 4% of gamers buy multiple games a month. With everything happening, I feel, and this is kind of where I'm at with everything that's happening right now, this is kind of what I think the end game is. Gaming as a whole has grown so quickly that these companies are kind of struggling to keep up in terms of hardware and software, keeping all these people with different varieties of genres that they like, keeping them happy. And I think they want to sort of shrink their user base in terms of they want quality over quantity by eliminating the fact that you can get games used. And there's a lot of people who kind of live off of that. That's how they're able to game. You're eliminating a big part of your consumer base, which sounds like, oh my God, that sounds terrible. But in reality, they don't want those customers. They really don't. If you buy a copy of Horizon Forbidden West, what they want is that copy to be the only copy. They don't want that copy to make more money because they're not making any of it. So at the end of the day, this feels like an attempt to sort of up the quote-unquote quality of their consumer and make them the most amount of money. They could care less about how a person who enjoys gaming as a hobby but could only afford a couple of games a year, and they supplement that by going to use games. They don't care about that consumer. And that's what ultimately this is what feels like, where gaming was for everybody and now gaming is for the 10%.
Yeah, and I agree with you on that. It's a great takeaway, and I think it's very true. I think what I always hear the counterpoint is that, well, the used game market takes money away from the studios, which then affects the developers, which then creates layoffs, and then you have this vicious cycle. I think the reality of it is, and I hate to sound crass about it, but too fucking bad.
Yeah.
Right? This is video games. This is supposed to be a fun hobby. To your point, it should not be a passion for the privileged. It should be a passion for people who really enjoy this medium and want to participate it. And however you get in is how you fit in. And if you do that through the used game market, you are every bit just as much of a gamer as the whales. And it's a shame that these publishers and these studios don't recognize that. And then when you get to platform holders like PlayStation, it's doubly offensive because these are the people who made you, right?
Right.
Because used games is almost like a form of word of mouth. Right?
Right.
People who don't know your franchise, who don't know if they're going to like Horizon, but see that Forbidden West is $24 on sale at GameStop or something like that, pre-owned, and give it a shot and end up becoming a fan for life, they'll show up to your next game, perhaps day one. You don't know. So you're thereby making it a harder barrier to entry to get people in and invested in your franchises, especially at a time where, if you are PlayStation specifically, you need buy-in more than ever right now.
Yeah.
With Marathon struggling to stay over 10K users, you need whatever you can get to get people in the door and stay there. And by being that way, it just eliminates any and all possibility for people to be introduced into your world, into your ecosystem, without having to make hard decisions about rent or mortgage. You know what I mean?
Right.
So,
and it's a silly argument because that copy already made its money. You already got that money in the bank.
yeah.
The people who buy those used copies, most likely than not, it's either used copy or no copy at all. It wasn't like you're missing out on the consumer. I'm sure there's some penny pinchers out there who would have bought the game if it wasn't available used or at a cheaper price. But the other side of that, Marco, is that places like GameStop have created some kind of competitive pricing where there are other places who are selling their games brand new at a cheaper rate in order to compete with used game markets. So
That's right.
You're eliminating an entire market just because you want to be able to make as much money as you can on that one copy, which is not realistic. That's not the way you should build your business. But yeah, so it is sadly going to be very tough for a lot of people out there. I mean, even for someone like myself who I have disposable income for my hobby, I'm going to have to make tough decisions in the next generation of consoles because I don't think I can afford a PlayStation and an Xbox and the games. That's a lot of money. It's kind of a sad moment in time where it went from a hobby that many people can enjoy to now it's just going to be for the elite. Is that really? Are we golfifying fucking video games?
Man, I hope not, bro. And we are seeing the elite in some cases and in some corners of the internet kind of damage controlling this a little bit.
Yeah.
And saying things like, why are we mad about PlayStation doing this when Steam is the exact same way? Let me answer that for you. Let me answer that. The difference is that, first of all, Steam was never in the business of physical games to begin with. Steam's lane was, and always will be digital software, so there's never been a rug pull.
Right.
This is a rug pull, right? Secondly, PC gaming is an open platform. Steam is not the only storefront you can go to get your games. You can go to Epic Game Store, you can go to GOG, you can go to lots of other places. You are not limited to just Steam, right? This is entirely different. You have one option, and that is it. So when I say it's not the same, it's because this is far more restrictive, and because it is a complete 180. To your point about, half jokingly, the here's how to shave, here's how to shave a game. Here's how to share a game. That whole thing is a thing of the past now, and now you're kind of stuck in this new world, and it's not fun to sit here and think, man, I have nowhere to go, and I'm beholden to PlayStation and only PlayStation. That's why it's not the same. So those people who are defending or comparing or trying to say there's a parallel between this and Steam, way off.
Yeah, and not to mention, Steam has a lot of users, and they're able, because they have so many users and so many people kind of gravitate to them when it comes to buying their PC games, they're able to have insane sales that you'll never see on an Xbox or a PlayStation. So even at that point, you're able to get in there and buy yourself a game that's originally $70, $6 or $7 at times, so they also have that going for themselves, so it's not the same at all. You can't compare those two things, man.
Yeah. Now, I guess with all that being said, Pablo, do we think that this decision will age well? And let me kind of contextualize that a little bit, because I think, as we alluded to, we all said, hey, we knew there was going to be a future where physical games are going to be a thing of the past at some point down the road. It came earlier than we thought. But because of that, because of the earliness of this, right, Do we think that this was such bad timing and such a bad way of doing it that this will still age like milk? Or do we think we'll get a couple years in and ultimately go, all right, it sucked, but it was inevitable and things are okay-ish enough to not say this was a complete disaster? Where do you land on that?
It depends on the future of consoles and where they're going. If Helix comes out and it's digital only, if PS6 comes out as digital only, there's really no other way to look at it. It's one of those things where it'll go the way of cassette tapes, where those things went away, people were very upset, but ultimately, as time went on, they've adapted to the new norm. And I think that that's eventually going to happen. I still think that this is a bad move. I still think that there's going to be a lot of conversations to be had. This isn't going away anytime soon. But ultimately, in about 5-6 years from now, we're going to look back at this and be like, man, that was a moment in time where things changed. But we're going to be in a position to where if you want to play, this is the barrier to entry, and it is what it is. I think that the alternative to that would be if Helix does come out with a disk drive, if the Switch 2 and 3 also support cartridges or whatever the hell that Switch 3 is going to have, I think at that point we could look back at this and be like, okay, PlayStation made a mistake. And I think that PlayStation would try to rectify that by selling an add-on or something of that sort, like they did with the PS5 digital-only system. So it really just depends where the market goes. Weirdly enough, it's in the hands of Nintendo and Xbox, the only kind of two other
to co-sign it or not co-sign it. Yeah.
Right. If they co-sign it, it's over. If they don't, then there could be the rebellion could start where PlayStation could go back on what they've deemed the future based on the market itself, you know?
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah, it is very market contingent. I will say I don't think this is going to age well because if we knew this whole transition to be inevitable, there were so many more elegant and consumer-friendly ways to deliver this message that regardless if we get used to this future or not, we will always look back on the way that it was conveyed to us in this crude, Band-Aid ripping fashion and say, that was the most evil, diabolical, fucked up ass way to usher in a new era of ownership / licensing in video games. So I think from that, Sony will always have a bruise from this, from a PR standpoint. I don't think that's ever going to go away. To me, I think this is their biggest scandal, probably since the first 3 years of the PS3 era, which were a nightmare. I think in some ways this is going to surpass that.
100%. Because the PS3 recovered. At the end of that console generation, they had beat Xbox. So look at Xbox One, for example. Don Matrick comes out, makes all these points. Hey, there's a console for you, like you mentioned earlier. The pricing of the console. The fact that it was the one thing where it was going to be everything. Movies, everything on that. Xbox has never recovered from that. You know? So I do think that that's similar in that way where PlayStation at that point could be put down a peg in terms of how people look at them going forward. So that is true. I will give you that.
Yeah. And I would also say that if even Xbox and Nintendo do ultimately co-sign this shift to digital only, they will have learned from the lessons that they gathered from watching Sony fall on their faces and say, okay, we can't do it that way. We've got to ease people into this. And we're going to talk about Xbox in a little bit, but I think just thinking about what they can do advantageously, opportunistically speaking, they can, to your point, go the opposite direction and say, no, we actually believe in physical media. And it would be the ultimate clapback against that old era where they showed how to game share at the PlayStation conference. Because as we all know, PlayStation was going to do the exact same thing. But they did a 180 at the last second because of what they saw Xbox One go through with the PR backlash. I can totally see the revenge happening now. And they go, actually, we've always believed, Pablo, in physical discs. We want you to have your game and do with it what you please. Now to that point, I gotta ask, do you think there is any chance at all that Sony may say one day, we heard the feedback, we get it, we are reversing this decision?
Yes, PlayStation could see this. They could see that the fact that the whole Xbox news that we're about to talk about didn't eclipse this physical media debacle I do think that there could be a way where they come back and be like, we're going to offer the ability to buy something to attach to your PS6 for your physical media, or even do something that Xbox is doing with this thing could convert your physical media to digital media. So I do think that that's a possibility.
Yeah. And look, to answer the question, I think that it is possible they'll reverse the decision. I just think it's slim because right now they seem to be way more interested in trying to take down community notes on the official X post than trying to actually resolve the consumer criticisms that people are facing right now. So I look at that and I think, well, they don't get it yet. They're just trying to suppress the backlash and control the message, just like they're trying to control the damn storefront itself. So, and then you also hear about the fact that they have already been repurposing their factories and have already kind of plotted out that they're going to be doing other things instead of printing, discs anymore. So they already seem like they're on track, and I don't know how much they can actually turn back on that. So
here's a little bit of where I'm thinking as well. I'm thinking Sony proper, not just PlayStation. I think Sony proper, who are part owners or creators of Blu-ray, I think that they are also kind of stepping a little bit back on discs and being able to print X amount of discs. And I think that the easiest way to do that is to completely eliminate PlayStation from printing discs to repurpose those factories, which is not my problem at the end of the day, right? That's not my problem. That's your problem. So you got to fix that one. You got to figure that one out. So it could be a decision made by Sony proper, but at the end of the day, if you're going to mess up PlayStation, which is your most profitable arm in your entire division, I think that you need to make sure that you do right by them. But will they? I don't know.
Yeah, there's a lot of things we don't know right now, man, and that's what makes this so disappointing and frustrating, but also fascinating just to kind of see how this all shakes out. Because, look, I hold PlayStation in high regard for what it's been for me over the years as a gamer from childhood to now, but I'm not in love with these motherfuckers. So, I mean, at the end of the day, look, it's great doing a PlayStation podcast and talking about a platform that has meant so much to me. But when they make a mistake of this magnitude, we have to call it out. We have to say what it is. We have to be honest with ourselves. And it's good to see that the community is not doing the forgot it in 24 hours thing that can tend to happen sometimes, especially with PlayStation, because if we're being honest, PlayStation definitely gets graded on a curve many times, and some of their not so great headlines kind of get pushed to the back burner so that other platforms' headlines can take precedent, which we, they tried that again with the Xbox stuff. It didn't work. I think it's just going to be, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens next, man. I don't know. Look, that is kind of where we're going to leave this off for now. I think we'll probably be talking about this a lot more in the future, unfortunately, as we see how this continues to shake out. So we'll be here to talk about any new developments. If there's a 180, we'll cover it. If there's not, we'll cover it. But in the meantime, if you are even the tiniest bit concerned, disgruntled, upset, frustrated, angry at PlayStation, it is completely valid. Don't let anybody try to talk you off that ledge and say, why does it matter to you, man? Because you're a fucking gamer, and and this is a big enough deal to raise more than a few red flags. So
and I like to ask PlayStation, hey, can you give us some good news so we could talk about it on this show here? Because it is getting dark in these streets.
It's getting ashy. I wish they would have announced something after that to be like, take your attention off that thing. Here's what we're doing over here. Check this out. They had nothing to kind of fall back on at all. It was just, take this raw right in the butt. Man, it's disgusting. So let's move on, man. Let's get to the next topic here. And of course, that is Xbox, because the Xbox reset has officially begun after weeks of ominous reports and rumors and rumblings about studio closures and layoffs of bloodbath-like proportions. Asha Sharma is finally outside talking about the key changes that are happening, and they are as follows. Starting with the whole studio closure thing, which was a big, big deal. That's what people were most concerned about. Lots of pins and needles all around. But let's talk about that first, man, because we found out that Compulsion and Double Fine are now independent, while Ninja Theory and Undead Labs have been sold, with each studio getting to keep the rights to their IP and still continuing forward with all previously announced projects. And this was definitely, I guess you can call it a silver lining of sorts.
For the studios, for those studios, for sure, The best possible outcome for Double Fine and Compulsion, they go back to being independent as they were before. And Ninja Theory and Undead Labs, with games in production, are not thrown to the wolves for them to be like, go find financing and to finish those games. They're at the very least landed somewhere where they will be allowed to finish those games, which are highly anticipated by many people. So when it comes to the studios, absolutely the best case scenario, and honestly, really good for them. You know, I think Double Fine specifically really thrived as an independent studio because they were unique and onto themselves, and so they're able to do that. Now, of course, Compulsion and Double Fine are gonna have to fight or flight in terms of surviving an independent market, which is difficult right now because the gaming market as a whole, the industry, is in a downward spiral. But they're given the ability to do that instead of being outright closed. So it's a good thing for them. So I'm really happy about this because I was pretty concerned. I'm a huge Double Fine fan. I love Psychonauts. And not only that, though, Marco, which is absolutely incredible, is that Xbox is giving them their franchises back. It's not like Double Fine is going out into the world of independent without their Psychonauts license, which is their biggest license. So that's really good.
Yeah, I was relieved. I was very relieved. Damn near happy to see this news because when layoffs happen, it's awful because you see the big number and you go, holy shit, that's a lot of people whose lives just got turned upside down, and it's terrible. And we'll talk about that in a second. But when studios close, a lot of things die with it, including, to your point, IP. And that was what worried me the most, is that if these studios get closed down completely and these projects that are already in motion never see the light of day, that's it. You don't get a Psychonauts 3. You don't get another Senua if you're a Senua fan. You don't get another State of Decay. And so the fact that this is not going to happen, I appreciate the business that was done to let these studios spin off and do their own thing, or to at least work towards selling them instead of just kind of doing the Blue Point thing. So that to me is kind of the win, in my opinion. And I'm very relieved about that. And I'm seeing people try to suppress that, and I don't like it because a lot of, let's just call it what it is, a lot of the Xbox rhetoric out there was they're just going to close a bunch of studios down, it's going to fucking suck. And when it didn't happen, there's this, but still energy.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's necessarily the right way to kind of frame it. Again, layoffs are always bad, and we'll talk about that in a bit. We're not going to just brush past it here on the podcast. But the fact that we have a win out of this in the continued existence of 4 well-beloved, if not niche studios, that is a huge deal, and it's okay to kind of go, okay, that's dope to see that, you know?
Especially under the circumstance that they were purchased, where, Phil Spencer's purchased them and like, do your thing. And all they did was their thing. And so then for them to be closed down for doing their thing would have been fucked up. So now they're able to do their thing independently or under a different studio. So that is that at the very least, that's what I'm most happy about. Because when you sell your company to a corporation like Xbox or any corporation, you're always going to run the risk of them potentially shutting you down. But when you are purchased, and the reason that you sell is under the promise of you not changing and still doing the things that you do, and then being closed out for doing that, that is just that's terrible for everybody involved. And the fact that didn't happen here, that is definitely something to celebrate.
Yeah, and if it was that way, where all these just got gutted and that was it, and that's the end of that, Pitchfork City, bring them out.
100%.
I would be right there with y'all, but like, we gotta call it what it is. This was a little bit better than we thought it would be. Again, still bad, but let's count our blessings a little bit that these studios get to live and fight another day.
Yes.
But there is another studio, Pablo, that could join these other ones, and it is one that is quite beloved to my boy Pablo right here, and that is Arcane Leon, because apparently they are currently in the consultation process to be sold off, which basically means they're being kind of evaluated, and they're exploring ways that they can kind of spin off this studio as well. And that comes off the heels of reports surfacing that their Blade project has gone vastly over budget, and that it has been delayed internally. I don't know, man. This is it's shocking, but it's also not, in a way.
Yeah, let me jump in here, Marco.
Please.
Big Arcane fan, love Dishonored series. This is on them. You're handed over a prestigious license like Blade, and you fumble that over budget, delayed, I think perhaps this is a bridge too far, even for Xbox. Thankfully, French laws have stopped them from being shut down or sold outright, so they're going through their due process. So, best outcome I hope comes to Arcane Studios, because I would really love to see them go back and do a Dishonored 3. But at this point, when you look at Arcane, they haven't really done anything that you can run home about. Deathloop wasn't it, and becoming a studio that you're going to make a Marvel game. That is a huge opportunity for you to, do what Insomniac did, where really step out here and be a studio that people respect and really look forward to when it comes to their next game. The fact that they haven't been able to kind of execute on that, this is definitely an Arcane issue. I don't think a studio has ever been given a longer leash. So ultimately, at the end of the day, this is one studio that you can look at and be like, they were giving a lot of opportunities. They were handed over a Marvel license. And yet here we are, no games released, fumbling the bag in such a massive way that in this studio, and I hope it doesn't happen, if this studio is shut down, it would be the one studio where I go, yeah, what is it that you expect anybody to do for them? Other than if you can't deliver on a Marvel game, and you haven't been able to go back to your Dishonored days, critically acclaimed, sure, it didn't sell great, but still given so much hype and given so much trust, and not be able to do something with that trust, huge letdown. So
yeah, they're definitely living off of the past, and I get it, but also this is very much a what have you done for me lately kind of industry now. And if you don't have an answer to that question, especially when you've been gift wrapped a Marvel license, that's a big problem. So I'm with you. I think that this would be disappointing if they are no longer part of the Xbox umbrella, but I can't sit here and act surprised. I mean, a week or two ago, I compared this whole project to Perfect Dark with the Initiative. It just feels like one of those pie in the sky, it's never going to come together kind of projects. And from what it seems, that's exactly what this is. And I chalk this up to Arcane Leon maybe biting off more than they can chew. They are, as we mentioned last time we talked about this, they are the immersive sim studio. And maybe they were too immersive simming this and realized, oh, wait, we have to make this into a Blade game and didn't know how to do that and ran into the kind of problem that I think Playground Games ran into when they went from having to make Forces to make a Fable and probably didn't have a real path forward to make that happen effectively. And all the while, years have been flying off the calendar, which increases the amount of cost to just make this game and pay your team. So I can see this kind of snowballing in all the wrong ways and becoming a big problem for them. So I hope they're able to get sold off. I hope that their reputation from the past is what helps them get sold off and stay alive. If you're ever going to play that card, this is the time to do it. To kind of keep yourself above water. But realistically speaking, I'd be very surprised if Blade ever sees the light of day.
I agree.
And if it does, I don't think it's going to be anywhere near what we kind of mentally envisioned that it could be as a project. But it's very sad to see that this is where their fate is right now. But there's no denying, to your point, that you look at this and you go, yeah, this tracks, unfortunately. That's not all, though, man. Because while all of this studio spin-off stuff was going on, there was also some refocusing of sorts with some of the current studios, particularly Bethesda. So we found out that Bethesda will from here on be overhauled to focus solely on Fallout, the Elder Scrolls, Doom, Quake, and Wolfenstein, while Mojang and King will now be brought fully under the Xbox umbrella and report directly to Asha Sharma. I have a lot of thoughts about this. Do you mind if I kind of dive in first here? Let me play that little. So let me attack the tail end of that with the Mojang and King part now being under the Xbox umbrella. Why now? First of all, why not way before this? Because it's Minecraft we're talking about, right? Like you would think Phil Spencer and Sarah Bond would have said, nope, that needs to come under us ASAP because that's fucking Minecraft.
Yeah.
Why does Asha Sharma have to come in there and do the sensible thing in 2026 that should have happened the second that Mojang and King were acquired by Xbox? It makes zero sense to me that it took this long for that to happen. That's number one. Bethesda, though. Pablo, I'm going to be controversial to some people. I absolutely love this. I absolutely love this new focus. I thought Indiana Jones was wonderful. I'm not even a huge Indiana Jones fan, but the fact that it is 2026, Pablo, and we don't have a Fallout 5.
Oh, yeah.
We still don't have the Elder Scrolls 6. We still don't have a new Quake. We don't have a Wolfenstein 3 yet. Unacceptable. And I would love to see another Indiana Jones down the road. I would love to see another Starfield. I'm one of them.
Yeah.
But hot damn, bro. We have to get another Fallout and Elder Scrolls in people's hands before they pass away. It's just we have to do that. Like, and so I hate the fact that it came down to this. I don't like that part of it. I want to be clear. I don't like the fact that they had to kind of pick and choose where to kind of put their eggs and in which baskets. I don't like that. But if this is where we are, I can't look at these IP here and say Quake can die and just diminish all of the history that has done in the gaming industry. Even though I think it's well past its prime and it's well past its time, I would love to see that fan base get that dream comeback experience, even if it's not for me, right? Doom, the games haven't done a whole lot for me lately, but that's fucking Doom, right? If I have to choose between Doom, living on to see another day, or fucking Starfield, it's a no-brainer to me, you know? So I'm on that camp where I say, okay, I hate that we got here, but if we had to slot 5 or 6 franchises that have to live on, these are the ones that have to be prioritized.
Okay, here's the thing with that, Marco. When you look at under the Bethesda umbrella, that makes sense. However, if you're going to make a Quake, it's going to be id Software, so they're not going to make Doom. And if you're going to make Doom, you're not going to make Quake, because they're the same studio that makes both those games, right? So for me, I think focusing on Quake is ridiculous. Quake had a 2022 release just a couple of years ago, full release. It peaked at 17,000 players on Steam and currently has 347 people playing it right now. So I understand the history and the legacy of Quake, but you can appreciate something like that and not have to divert any kind of assets, manpower, or money towards that franchise ever again. Or at the very least, not in sacrifice of another Doom. It takes 6 to 7 years to make a game now. So regardless of how you look at it, it would be a little bit more, it would make a little more sense if they were a little more clear to say, none of these games are going to be specific to any studio anymore, and any of these studios within Bethesda can make a Quake or can make a Doom. That would make a lot more sense. Now, I will say this about the Starfield situation. That's gone. We're never getting Starfield again. Dead and gone. Interesting thing about Indiana Jones is a couple hours after they announced this, Machine Games announced that Indiana Jones was profitable for them. So I think that's their way of saying of, we're going to make Wolfenstein, but then we're going to make Indiana Jones. I think that Indiana Jones is a franchise for them that is going to see a sequel eventually. But I just think a lot of this is cool because we definitely know the Fallout, but who's going to make it, right? Skyrim is coming. What are you going to do to make this a possibility? Because if we're still going to wait after Skyrim to make a Fallout, we're still going to wait 10 more years for that, you know? So I would have liked a little more clarity into what exactly does this mean? Does this mean that Bethesda as a whole is not going to interconnect and everybody's going to be available to make some of these games? But ultimately, this is the right move. But when you look at this, what other games did they have other than these games and Starfield and Indiana Jones? We're still waiting for Elder Scrolls. We're still waiting for Fallout. So I would have loved a little more clarity as to, this is cool, but how are you going to make this a possibility?
Yeah, I mean, I think Quake was a bit more of a question mark for a lot of people, and we've been waiting for Wolfenstein 3 for a lifetime at this point. So I think that's good to know that it's not lost on them anymore. So
it didn't really sell either, though. That's the problem.
It didn't sell, but I think that there's talks of it potentially getting some sort of adaptation into TV, or I think it's actually a TV series, if I'm not mistaken. It could be film, I don't know, but one of the two. And if that's the case, then yeah, you want to have something joining with that, much in the same way you would like to have had a new Fallout pair up with the Fallout TV series or something to that effect, right? So yeah, I mean, look, I think you're right. Starfield is probably dead and gone. And I will also agree that they do need to answer more questions about how they are going to manage all these projects at the same time, because you only have one studio doing both more often than not. So I can maybe see some of those rumors about a dedicated Fallout studio coming true. We've heard like the fictitious Vault Tech Studios type of thing bounced around kind of half jokingly for a while. Maybe there's truth to that. Maybe they enlist Obsidian to do that, since Obsidian was not part of this whatsoever. I don't know. But yeah, you're right. There are questions to answer. But again, I think that this was the right batch to kind of focus on, in my opinion. Now, I will say, I want to circle back to Indiana Jones, though. I see that cut not because Indiana Jones wasn't good or wasn't profitable, but because they can't afford to keep having Todd Howard go do pet projects anymore. You got to get back in your bag with either Elder Scrolls or Fallout. You got to pick one, bro. But you can't just keep dancing around doing all these different things. Starfield, Indy, all this other shit. No, we need you here.
But if you are laying people off of these companies, how are you going to be able to now accomplish this? So it's just one of those things where this is cool, but you're once again talking a little bit out of both sides of your mouth by saying you want these things to be the focus, But now you're laying off people. You're laying off 25% of Obsidian, who wasn't part of the studio thing, but you want them to keep making games. And there's a rumor that they're making a new Fallout, that they're going to be the studio to make Fallout, right? So, man, I need more details. Tell me how you're going to accomplish this, you know?
Yeah. And to that point, we might as well kind of dig into it now, man. 3,200 layoffs that are going to occur over the next year, which accounts for roughly 20% of Xbox's workforce. That's a frighteningly large number. Hot damn, y'all. Like, what are we doing to people's lives at this point? You know, like, who would want to ever enter the gaming industry and make a stable way of life for themselves if this is what you can expect? So it's sad on that level alone. But then you have the questions that you just raised, right? Where, yes, we are sad for these job losses. We hope those people are able to rebound quickly and get where they need to be. But now what? From a development standpoint, now what from a, how are you going to make all of this work with 20% less people helping you make Xbox happen day in and day out? And look, that's an answer that goes above my head. That's what Asha Sharma gets paid the big bucks to solve. And maybe she has a game plan. She seems to be very much around speed and efficiency. She doesn't like getting bogged down by meetings and going through all these different channels to get things done. So maybe she wants to see a more streamlined approach. And maybe this is just kind of step one of a larger scheme or plan to make that happen. But that remains to be seen. To your point, I want to know more too. But just that number alone, though, man, is such a fucking letdown.
And I appreciate that to a certain extent, but speed doesn't always mean efficiency. So if you're making decisions on a couple of days, notice here and there, that's not advantageous to developing games. It takes so long to make these games. And, you know, you have her also saying that she wants Xbox to be a system where 1 billion people are playing per day. How are you going to accomplish that with less people on your team, less studios, less games? There's a lot of questions still to be had here. 3,200 people losing their jobs is absolutely embarrassing, especially when you look at the past. Phil Spencer and Sarah Bond, how they wanted more studios. They wanted to beef up this even more. Like, what were they doing? These numbers didn't happen overnight. This was a long-standing issue. And now we know what Asha Sharma came in to really, this is really the reason she was in here, you know? It wasn't to keep up status quo. It was to come in here and roll heads, you know? And that is exactly what's happening. But as someone who is really invested in the Xbox ecosystem as well as PlayStation and Nintendo, a gamer through and through, right? So I want to know what you're going to do to make the 1 billion a day a possibility with less studios and less people working with. How are you going to accomplish that? But ultimately for me, I just think that this is a sad day. I think this is way too many people losing their jobs. And when a company like Xbox, backed by $1 trillion company with Microsoft, can't survive the industry, can't cut it without massive amount of layoffs, that is an indication of where the industry is as a whole. And it is not good.
And, you know, Asha Sharma's been, thankfully to her credit, she has been, I think, as transparent as you could ask for out of a CEO. So I'm grateful for the fact that despite that tough position, that she is volunteering a lot more insight into the why of things being the way they are. And I know some people take issue, especially if you were a fan of the Phil Spencer, Sarah Bond era, that, you know, a lot of what she's doing is kind of alluding to their biggest mistakes. But the reality is the reality of it. And it's just they made a lot of bad moves, especially towards the end there. And she has had to come in, grab the mop, the broom, and the dustpan, and get to cleaning up a lot of messes that were left behind for her, man.
I was a big fan of Phil Spencer myself. I thought he was great. You know, he took over the Xbox One and created Game Pass. He did what he thought was right in order to revitalize the ecosystem. However, you look at that now and you go, he done fucked up quite a bit, you know?
You know, speaking of transparency, Asha Sharma did release a public memo explaining that all of these aforementioned moves are in response to the unhealthy state of the Xbox's business model of years past, of regimes past, citing that their big bets on Game Pass acquisitions and their whole multi-platform strategy even just simply failed to deliver the growth that previous regime expected. And that was kind of like was a little bit of a diss, and
It
I think
was.
that's and it was deserved. I will say, to kind of piggyback off of what we're talking about already. The reality of the situation is that Game Pass did not grow anywhere near as much as they had hoped, and there's a lot of reasons for that. Acquisitions and just buying up all these studios and not knowing how to manage them, not knowing what to do with them, not really knowing how to control the flow of creativity and making sure people are making games people actually want to buy is a problem. And look, man, she was very direct. The multi-platform strategy didn't exactly pan out the greatest either. And that, to me, was the biggest nugget of information that goes, okay, that's important. Because we can sit here and say, well, you know what? Because they can't sell consoles right now, they should keep putting games on PlayStation. Well, she's saying, yes, we can do that, but it ain't doing what y'all think it's doing for us right now either. So I found this to be very insightful. But I want to get your take on what she mentioned here with Game Pass acquisitions and multi-platform and just how that hasn't lived up to expectations at all.
They took a big swing on that. I just think that they did too much too quickly without focusing on the thing that matters most, is getting people to buy your console in order for them to take advantage of Game Pass. They focused too much on Game Pass and acquiring studios to make Game Pass look great, and did very little when it comes to telling you why you need to get a console. At the end of the day, you have to really sell your hardware in order for people to enjoy your software and enjoy the subscription service that comes with that hardware, right? And it feels to me like that's not something they focused on. They just thought sheer amount of content is going to push people to get a Xbox because they want Game Pass. And in reality, you want people to want an Xbox and enjoy Game Pass as an add-on and not the thing that is driving the hardware, because people just didn't buy it. They just didn't. They decided that I'm going to still purchase my games at full price, whether they come out on PlayStation or an Xbox. That's just the thing that I'm going to do. So yeah, this is the right call out. I think that I'm glad that she's not coming in to double down on Game Pass, triple, quadruple down on Game Pass. And it is just a thing where we are actually going to refocus everything and really look at the hardware of it all as our main focus, which is, I think, great.
Yeah, that should be your anchor for Xbox moving forward by far. You're right about that. I think Game Pass is not necessarily on its way out the door, but I think it will be thoroughly revised within the next year or two, I would say. So if it's no longer the big bet as currently constructed, then I see Asha's vision of Game Pass probably taking shape sometime sooner than later, and then figuring out what that can do to the bottom line. But it is good to at least know that a lot of those rumors going around that, they stopped inking contracts with new games, like that's not true.
Not true, yeah.
So any of that you're seeing out there, guys, that's actually not correct at all. Acquisitions, I think we might not see one in quite some time. And the multi-platform strategy, look, I think there's more exclusives to come.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that it's going to drastically go the opposite way, but I think there will be a slow and steady cadence of maybe something more 50-50 going forward until they can kind of see the lay of the land with how Helix takes shape, what they want to do there, and how that kind of feeds into what their new business model will look like going forward. But it'll be very, very interesting to see what else she kind of does, because I think this reset, I think now I kind of see why she's calling it that. It makes more sense now. It's not just this word that they're saying. It's not corpo lingo. There's really things that they are saying. We are going to start over now with how we approach X, Y, and Z. And I would just say, if you're an Xbox-centric gamer, prepare for more changes. Not all of them are going to be horrible changes, but you are going to have to make some adjustments, because there's a lot of changes that have been overdue for such a long time from the mistakes that Phil and Sarah left behind. So I would just kind of brace yourselves for more of that.
I think Phil and Xbox of the old were way too obsessed with creating the future of console gaming. They wanted to be the first, and they wanted to shape the industry in a way where they really had no leverage or to do that. And I think they were really obsessed with doing that. And ultimately, I think what Asha is doing is taking a few steps back and really saying the consoles, the way they work is the way they've always worked, and that's the way they're going to continue to work. And I think that that's great, because, they were way too obsessed with creating their own definition of success. Yep. And this is the outcome. You cannot change an industry from within when you're not even the market leader. That's just the way it is. You can't do that. Period.
Whew. Yeah, that's super true. But that is going to do it for this week's episode of The PlayStation Effect. Heavy conversations all around, but if you enjoyed the conversation, please be sure to subscribe before you head out. We drop new episodes every single Tuesday. But until next time, thanks for tuning in. Stay safe, save often, and we'll see you next week.